December 22, 1944. Ardennes Forest. The trees shimmered with a cruel beauty, ice clinging to every branch, every foxhole rimmed with frost as deadly as shrapnel. Private Danny Cole's hands had stopped feeling like his own. The army wool coat on his back trapped little warmth. Around him, 2 men from his squad had already shuffled off for evacuation, casualties not of bullets or bombs but frostbite. Every digit lost to the cold felt personal. The enemy wasn't always someone you could shoot. Regulation said nothing about mercy. Army Regulation XX Paragraph 12. U.S. personnel will not wear enemy uniforms or insignia under any circumstances. Offenders faced court-martial, the ultimate military shame. But the dead German soldier 30 feet away wore a coat so warm, so inviting, it gnawed at Danny's resolve. Amputation versus violation. Rules versus fingers. Survival wasn't supposed to look this way. The truth was, the problem started thousands of miles from the icy forests, in heated offices where procurement officials decided what American soldiers would wear. The M1943 field jacket, a marvel of manufacturing, cotton outer shell, wool liner, looked good in bureaucracy, but in the Belgian winter men lost body parts before breakfast. Charlie Morrison, first to go, watched his toes darken overnight. Then Jackson, then Rodriguez. The cold was winning by numbers. "Keep your goddamn hands in your pockets," Sergeant Kowalski growled, a career army man who understood practical survival even if regulations didn't. There was no talk of German gear. No open rebellion. Just hunkered silence and unspoken understanding. Do what you have to, just don't make it obvious. Danny tried every approved trick. Newspaper in gloves. Undershirts around wrists. Nothing worked. Requests for better gear vanished into supply chain bureaucracy. Every day the cold got worse. The German coat became a beacon, intact, undamaged, slumped against a frozen body no one had claimed. Danny's mind balanced regulation against desperation with every pass by the tree. Inside he kept replaying his father's words, "Rules are important, son, but so is coming home." That afternoon, Danny watched Peters, the tough one, peel off his gloves to eat and reveal white, bloodless fingers. Frostbite was a silent enemy, no pain, just numbness, then loss. Danny saw his chance that night. New guard rotation, squad asleep, cover of darkness thicker than any order. No more waiting. He checked his rifle, walked with purpose toward the German corpse, focused on the engineering of the enemy's coat instead of the man who wore it. Dense Feldgrau wool, high collar, reinforced shoulders, moisture-repelling outer shell. It was built by men who had learned painfully on Russia's front what survival meant. Danny removed the coat, feeling the weight, the difference between proper warmth and American ration gear. Within moments, the coat's insulation changed everything. Danny felt heat blossoming over his body. His fingers surged to life. For the first time in weeks, warmth returned. He buttoned the coat and made his way back through the darkness, heart pounding. The risk was obvious. Friendly fire, court-martial, betrayal from his own side, but so was the transformation. He directly violated Army order for survival. Sergeant Kowalski, awake and watching, saw the coat and said nothing, a silent blessing in the smoke. Danny understood. Permission without permission, rules bent as far as they could go. He hunkered into the foxhole, wrapped in forbidden warmth. Out in the darkness, the German coat worked. Danny's fight against the cold had turned an enemy's engineering into a field expedient. The greatest risk was now showing on his back, but the stakes had shifted. As morning approached, Danny's fingers flexed again. He'd crossed the line, but he had kept the tools he needed most. And as the day thawed slowly, the real battle, the one between practical survival and bureaucratic authority, was just beginning. Danny Cole wasn't alone for long. The forbidden German coat warmed his body, but the tension it created was just as real. As the squad woke up, eyes lingered a little too long on the thick Feldgrau wool. No one said a word, not at first. Silence was safety, deniability, a thin shield against the rules everyone knew, but everyone hated. For now, the coat was camouflage for survival. Danny wore it everywhere. On patrol, in the foxhole, during meals. The shift was immediate. Warmth returned to his fingers, his thoughts clearer, tasks easier. Others in the squad noticed, and quiet glances turned to shy nods. Soon Williams came over during a break. "Where'd you get it?" he whispered. Danny pointed to the tree. By evening, Williams returned with a German scarf knotted around his neck. Still, regulations loomed over them like another layer of frost. The squad could feel the divide. What they needed to do to keep fighting, and what the rulebook required to stay American. Danny's sergeant, Kowalski, kept his orders practical: Keep your hands warm however you have to. No debate. No open defiance. But every glance toward the German coat was an unspoken question. How far is too far? A day later, a replacement from England named Morrison arrived, green as spring grass, eager but unprepared. 4 days in the cold, his hands turned white, evacuated before he'd even fired a weapon. Danny wondered how many more would fall before the bureaucracy realized the enemy wasn't just the Germans, it was the cold, abetted by poor planning. The weather grew worse, temperatures at night dropped to single digits. Danny became an unintentional expert, coaching squad mates on what to look for in enemy gear. Feldgrau wool was heavier than American issue, loops inside for added layers, reinforced buttons for wind protection. Every detail was designed for brutal winter. German engineering was born of pain, fighting Russians on the Eastern Front, losing tens of thousands to the ice and snow. They had studied those deaths, adapted their uniforms, learned the science of survival. The Americans, new to this kind of suffering, were learning by desperate imitation. Danny's coat was no longer just an act of defiance, it was a lifeline that others quietly sought. But the compromise was precarious. The arrangement worked, until it was nearly exposed. A photographer from Stars and Stripes came to shoot morale pictures. As he clicked through routine photos, he saw Danny's coat, saw German wool caps and scarves across the squad. Slowly he put his camera down, realizing the story behind the images. "How cold does it get at night?" he asked Kowalski. 6 degrees, the sergeant replied. The camera stayed shuttered. "Appreciate that, Sarge," the photographer said, understanding survival now outranked image. As days passed, word spread through the trenches not by command, but by observation and necessity. Charlie Company, taking note of Danny's coat, began showing up with their own salvaged German gear. Within a week, entire squads quietly wore enemy wool. Survival above all, rules just ink on paper. But everyone also knew, if higher-ups saw, it could all collapse. Danny's position became more visible, which meant more risk. Sergeant Kowalski called him aside, voice hushed in the supply trench. "Too many soldiers wearing German gear. Headquarters is getting nervous. Photos are reaching the rear. Stay quiet, keep it low, hope spring comes before someone makes an example." But there was no time to relax. One night, Danny encountered a patrol from a neighboring unit. All 3 men wore German coats. The recognition was immediate, a shared smile of defiant practicality. "Guess we're not the only ones," Danny said. "Guess not," one replied, heading off into the darkness. Every night, Danny calculated the risks. What would happen if an officer saw the coat and decided discipline mattered more than survival? What would happen if the supply line finally delivered enough warm gear, and this tale of shared rebellion faded into the mud? The balance was fragile. Politics and paperwork fought against field reality, and Danny wore the evidence on his back every day. Through the bitter January cold, one truth stood out. Across the Ardennes, American soldiers had quietly decided survival was worth the risk, worth betraying the rulebook, worth the quiet solidarity of breaking the same visible rule. Danny had become part of a silent movement, bound not by orders but by the urgent need to endure. The cold ruled the Ardennes, but so did army regulations, indifferent to suffering. In January's deepest freeze, Danny Cole faced his moment of reckoning, a confrontation he knew was coming but hoped might pass him by. On orders, he slogged 3 miles through frozen mud to battalion headquarters, heart thudding with every step. German coat slung over his arm, its weight no longer just warmth but evidence. Inside a commandeered farmhouse, Colonel Thomas Brennan sat like a judge behind a battered desk, Danny's German coat spread across it. Brennan's voice was neutral, official. "Private Cole, I understand you've been wearing this for 3 weeks." Danny nodded, resisting the urge to defend himself with too many words. Brennan inspected the coat, fingers running over its dense wool. "Substantially warmer than ours," he muttered, then fixed his gaze on Danny. "I've received reports. Your solution is popular. Why?" Danny answered plainly, "U.S. gear isn't enough for this cold. Men are losing fingers and toes faster than to enemy action, sir." Brennan didn't argue. 63 evacuated from cold injuries in 3 weeks. Nearly a full company lost. "What makes the German equipment superior?" Brennan demanded. Danny explained, denser wool. Layers to trap air. Wind-blocking construction. The Germans learned from Russian winters, redesigned everything after losing thousands. "We didn't have that experience." Brennan processed the answer, forehead creased. War had always been about adaptation. Now, field practicality clashed with policy. It was a test not just of Danny but the army itself. Regulations prohibited wearing enemy gear for valid reasons. Friendly fire risk, chain of command discipline, propaganda optics. But regulations didn't keep men alive. In foxholes, survival outweighed policy. Brennan leaned forward. Private Cole, I have a problem. Soldiers have solved it by violating rules. He paused, a silence filled with the pain of hard choices. What would you do? Danny chose honesty, document as field adaptation. Require marking for identification. Submit urgent requisition for proper gear and admit ours is failing. Brennan looked grim but finally, almost approving. He handed the coat back. You did what was necessary. The crisis was personal but its results were systemic. Danny became a consultant for cold weather gear across the battalion. With clipboard, pencil and relentless curiosity, he interviewed soldiers, sketched designs, measured insulation. He learned that German socks prevented blisters, gloves allowed fine motor skill, scarves wrapped twice over. Each element was functional innovation born of suffering. Danny's honest report ran 37 pages. Brennan read it in one sitting. Excellent work. Honest. Practical. It'll also be ignored above division. Danny understood. The wheels of military change grind slowly. By the time equipment was upgraded, the winter would have ended and men would have suffered needlessly. But in the trenches, improvised solutions still saved lives. German coats, gloves and scarves kept hundreds functional. Unofficially, quietly, temporarily, they survived. The solution only worked if it stayed invisible, deniable, a secret pact between officers who understood reality and men who already calculated the risk. Field reality was shifting beneath Danny's feet. The compromise, survive first, follow rules second, needed bureaucratic cover. Friendly fire risk still loomed. Colonel Brennan's pragmatic solution, mark coats with a white cross, a medical symbol visible at distance, so no American soldier would mistake his own. The mark became a code, not for defiance but for ingenuity. Spring approached. Temperatures rose. German gear gradually disappeared. Danny kept his coat, now less a badge of rebellion, more a symbol of survival. He hadn't worn it for regulation or for comfort, but because it worked. The final weeks of winter blurred into memory, men in enemy coats exchanging understanding glances, officers looking the other way, photographers pretending not to see. The regulation had been bent. The spirit of survival had triumphed, quietly and without drama. With the thaw, an unspoken gratitude lingered, a bond between men who had broken the same rule for the same reason. The story wouldn't make the official histories, but whispers would survive in foxholes and hunting camps for decades. For Danny and his squad, the greatest betrayal would have been freezing out of stubborn pride. Danny had risked reprimand, tribunal, even friendly fire. But he kept his fingers, his dignity, and his allegiance to the soldiers around him, choosing humanity when the rulebook ran out of answers. Spring arrived in the Ardennes with an uneasy relief. The snow thawed, the earth softened, and the forbidden wool disappeared, quietly folded back into packs or stashed in makeshift caches. Danny Cole's battalion was battered but intact. Frostbite casualties stopped but the memory of the cold, and the rules defied in its service, lingered with every sunrise. Danny's service ended with little fanfare. No medals for practical courage, no recognition for surviving the cold. July 1945 saw him discharged, a train ticket home in hand. His duffel contained everything the army let him keep, including the German coat he'd saved his fingers with. That made no sense to regulations but it made perfect sense to Danny. Back in Whitehall, Montana, the rhythms of home replaced those of war. Danny went to work in his father's hardware store, answered few questions about the conflict, and avoided talk about what he'd done to outlive that frozen winter. His neighbors understood. Montana had sent enough boys to Europe and the Pacific. Most returned wanting only silence and the chance to fix what could be mended. Danny married Ruth from the post office. Built a house. Raised 2 daughters and a son. The German coat hung in his closet, a relic not of the enemy but of a challenge overcome by common sense. Ruth noticed it once. That's not army issue, is it? Danny just nodded. Kept me from losing my fingers? He offered. Should you have kept it? Ruth asked. Danny shrugged. Probably not. But I did. Every hunting season, Danny would pull out the coat and shrug it on before heading into Montana's cold. It worked as well in the mountains as it did in Belgian forests, windproof, resilient, engineered for endurance. His hunting partner, Roberts, a Pacific veteran, asked about it but never pressed. Danny explained, dead German, Belgium 44. And Roberts nodded because war made practical men of everyone. The coat lasted nearly 40 years, outliving 3 American jackets and countless stores of gloves. Danny wore it through hunting trips, fence repairs, teaching his son to shoot. German engineering, made for suffering, kept bringing warmth long after the fighting was done. In 1985, Danny's 16-year-old grandson Michael found it folded carefully in the closet. The buttons, the weight, the subtle foreign thread all marked it as different. "Grandpa, what's this?" Michael asked. Danny looked up. "German army coat from the war." Michael wondered, "You're allowed to have this?" Danny was honest. "Probably not, but I never gave it back." Michael pressed. "Why not?" Danny paused. "Equipment failed. Men were losing fingers. That coat kept me warm enough to function. Kept my hands working. Saved my life. Broke the rules, but it was worth it." Michael put the coat away, sensing the story behind the material. "Did you get in trouble?" he asked. "Sort of. Then not really." Colonel decided survival mattered more than rules. Danny's gaze drifted back to the past. "The coat worked," he said finally. "Still works." Danny died in November 1987, quick and without suffering. A heart attack while repairing a neighbor's fence, the same German coat keeping him warm in Montana's early snow. Michael inherited the coat, wore it hunting for 20 more years, then kept it folded in a trunk when it finally wore out. Even German engineering couldn't outlast a lifetime, but the story did. Official Army history notes cold weather casualties in the Ardennes. Over 60 men from Danny's battalion, hundreds elsewhere. Reports recommended better gear for future campaigns, but didn't mention the quiet rebellion, the unauthorized solutions, the wool coats borrowed from fallen enemies. That truth stayed in footnotes and private memories. Danny never gave interviews, never boasted. His gift was fixing things. Fences, hardware, hunting gear, and, when the situation called for it, his own survival. The German coat became just another problem solved. Quiet, practical, effective. The lesson, echoing across generations, was simple but profound. Sometimes survival means breaking the rules that fail you. Sometimes heroism is silent, practical, and completely uncelebrated. In a world that prizes medals and myth, Danny Cole was content to remain in the background. A man warm in the cold because he dared to do what was necessary. That was his war story. Simple. Honest.